Collective Awakening podcast,
sharing truth and knowledge in this time of conscious awakening
with Chris and Stephen.
Hello friends, and welcome to the Collective Awakening podcast. We're so pleased to be joined by Jeremy and Graeme once again, and they joined us, believe it or not, a year to this day. We find ourselves recording back on 9/11, which is absolutely no coincidence. So thanks so much, guys, for being back with us and sharing your time with us once again.
It's a pleasure. See how long it takes you to get this one cancelled. I think it was under an hour when you released it last time.
We'll try and behave ourselves this time. Although it did stay up on Spotify. I noticed that Spotify left it up.
Yeah, 100%. And it was. You hold the record for our fastest ever ban. But yeah, please don't hold back. Let's go for it. And really, when we have these discussions with you, we're discussing lifting out of what could be the great illusion into the great awakening. And last time we discussed what came about from 2020 and the journey that we've been on since. So much has happened over these past 4 years. So much is playing out. And what I'd really like to start to ask you both to begin this podcast is where you feel, where are we at now? And what do you feel is a fundamental information that our listeners and those sharing on this podcast will find useful at this moment and helpful?
Well, I'll set Norbs up to carry the torch, because I think it's very beautiful, actually, that this is 9/11. I didn't even know it was 9/11 last time, or at least I don't recall. And in answer to your question, and I want to set Norbs up as to sort of give an analysis of where we were 4 years ago and how historically recorded, because we did so many live broadcasts during COVID, and it can confidently be called COVID now. But, you know, how we've been shown to be, particularly Graeme and I, absolutely correct in our analysis at the time of things, predictions and what have you. And so it's gained us, you know, some significant sort of international credibility. I'm doing a lot of American podcasts now. In fact, I was introduced as the Yoda of natural medicine the other day, and I liked that a lot. But since it's 9/11 and you ask where we're at, and before I wind up the Norbs to go on a Norbs analysis rant, which is what got you cancelled so quickly, and what I love about Norbs is, you know, David Icke, which all of you, I'm sure, know of, whether you like him or not, was very influential in my early years of awakening, and a dark place he would take you, I must add. And it's ironic, actually, because now, you know, we've both been interviewed by both his sons, and most recently myself, Jamie Icke of iconic.com, and I was actually in a documentary called Infertile with Jamie, and he actually came as our special guest at our Ambleside live event, and a really great chap he is. And I think the most beautiful thing to say about Jamie, Gareth, I've only been interviewed once, is how positive Jamie Icke is about the future, and we share that. But the reference to David and how you started this podcast was David was talking some years ago about when you see controlled demolition of a building, which we'd all seen prior to 9/11. It's such a wonderful and magnificent thing to watch, you know, not 9/11, but, you know, a controlled demolition. There's a point where, you know, the charges have gone off and nothing seems to be happening. But internally, David would describe this infrastructure of the building was crumbling, and then 3, 4, 5, maybe longer seconds, you know, the whole structure would come down for all to see. But there's sort of this period of time, and here we are on 9/11, you know, one of the greatest crimes ever perpetrated against humanity because of its implications on humanity. And in answer to your question, where are we at? I think the infrastructure of deceit has crumbled, not crumbling, has crumbled. And the building of deceit have started their descent. And so many more people are seeing what is called the Great Awakening. But so whether they voice it publicly or not, and we've got some stories to tell, particularly that the professionals, the doctors and nurses are seeing it. So I think we're in a profound tipping point. In fact, if I had to call it, I'd say we've tipped it. And it is about holding the line while we see how messy and beautiful it will be on the other side. So that's what I want to hand to Norbs and give a sort of analysis since 2020 and when we spoke to you chaps a year ago. Norbs?
Yeah, I mean, we were just chatting before the show, and Jeremy and I, as part of one of our previous projects where we had a membership site, we were asked to publish. We were asked to make some comments about COVID in March of 2020 for our members who weren't terribly concerned, but they had family members that they wanted to talk to, and they wanted, just something to back them up when they were talking to the family and to try to prepare people for what was happening. And so we did one episode on COVID for members, and then it was very, very popular, and everybody wanted to share it with friends and family. And so we put it out sort of free to air, so to speak, on YouTube. And they became very popular. We then were asked to do more, and we did, I think, 30 or maybe close to 40 individual episodes where we just followed the news flow and commented on it. But we covered all the key points in the first 2 or 3 videos where we asked the right questions. What is really going on? Is there really a disease? Is it contagious? Does it staying away from people make any difference? Do wearing masks make any difference? And we came to the conclusion, although we left it open, we didn't make an absolute statement. We said, we're open to be wrong, but currently it looks like an enormous choreographed hoax being run by global forces utilizing their control over the mainstream media in the vast majority of the world. And we said what we think they're doing is they're just playing with the regular flu season, which again, flu is not a disease. It's a constellation of symptoms which tend to occur when the body is detoxing, which is triggered by seasonal inputs. And the body is removing toxicity at a specific time of the year when the body feels strong enough to do that. And it causes, the sniffles, temperature, headaches, upset stomach, coughing, all those sort of things are simply detox symptoms. And so we explained all these things, and we did all that. We stated pretty clearly that this is simply the flu, which is a detox, rebranded, made scary, using Hollywood techniques and using very, very powerful behavioral sort of behavioral psychology, literally weapons grade behavioral psychology. And we warned people not to be frightened, not to worry about it, and not, to try not to pay attention to it, and to please do not comply as much as you possibly can, because we believe it will lead to lockdowns, it will lead to restrictions on travel, it will lead to a vaccine being offered to us as a way of escaping from the lockdowns that have been imposed. And it will have the effect of demolishing the economy and indebting nations to central bankers or via central bankers. And it's, as usual, wars are all started by banks for banks, and that bankers make more money when they indebt people. When they lend money, that's how they make money. And they ultimately gain more control when they overly indebt people, They get people to go too far with the debt, and then the banks come in and take the assets. And that's the simple banking playbook. It always has been throughout history. And that, I believe, is what is going on with the nations. So all of the nations that got involved in COVID had a massive collapse in businesses, specifically focused on small family and medium-sized businesses, which were not allowed to open. And the big multinational online stuff was allowed to continue trading. And there was a tremendous wealth transfer from the small private family businesses to the multinationals. Trillions and trillions of dollars moved within the space of 9 months from one group to another. At the same time, massive government spending was enabled, and massive government borrowing, because remember, governments don't have any money, they have to borrow it in our names. So we're on the hook for it. They borrowed the money, they spent it into the economy, supposedly to try and support things and to pay for vaccines and to pay for healthcare and all these things. And so all the nations are now significantly more indebted than they were beforehand. The economies have all ground to a halt pretty much across the world. We've had massive inflation due to the monetary printing. This has all benefited banks because money flowing through the system from government spending through the system and borrowing enables banks to make money constantly. So the banks have had a respite. Bear in mind, the banks are still, they were rescued in 2008, but they didn't reform their behavior, and they continue to take excessive risks because they get paid. The banks have figured out a way of taking excessive risks, making profits, keeping the profits, and then when it goes wrong, they put their hand up wanting a bailout. And so they take all the profits and all the bonuses when they make money recklessly, and then when it goes wrong, they get bailed out by the back door. And so the banks were still in a mess, and they were beginning to start to sort of creak at the seams in late 2019. And I believe that the go-ahead for the pandemic was given in late 2019. And one of its main features was to rescue the bank's liquidity short term and to ultimately play for the long term, which is to destroy the individual nations, destroy people's trust in individual national institutions, be that the institution of politics within the country, whether you lose trust in all politicians of all colours and all persuasions, you lose trust in health regulators, you lose trust in legal institutions, everything. And the fundamental idea behind that, of course, is that we have in the shadows, and we've had in the shadows for many, many decades, globalist interests who are corporate or incredibly wealthy families who wish to control everything from one central point. And they've effectively been doing that. As you can see during COVID, every government throughout the world basically followed the same set of instructions, regardless of whether you had a right-leaning political party in charge or an extreme left-wing political party in charge. They followed the same plan everywhere. And so it's clear that they were all getting their instructions from above, but in the shadows. And so the long-term plan is to create such chaos within the individual nations that each individual nation is on the verge of bankruptcy, has potentially within each country a sort of the grounds or the beginnings of a potential civil war. And we've seen weaponized immigration being used. The immigration is not, it's not people fleeing war zones, because people who flee war zones are women and children, and the men stay and fight. What we're seeing is weaponized immigration of fighting aged males, designed specifically to in debt further the nations and to disrupt the ordinary sort of civic behavior of individual countries. And it's designed, everything that the politicians are doing at the moment is designed to annoy the national population as much as possible. They are desperately trying to, I mean, just look at the thing in the UK. They've deliberately voted to cancel the subsidies for heating, electric and gas heating for old people in the UK, knowing that it will kill approximately 4,000 pensioners due to the cold. And that's to save £1.5 billion. And they've had a vote on that, and it's been very highly publicised. It's all over the media. But at the same time, they're sending 10 or 11 billion, so 8 to 10 times that amount, is being sent to random countries overseas so that they can address climate change. So these things are designed to annoy people. The man in the street sees that and he goes, "You're freezing pensioners to death, even though you promised you wouldn't do that, yet you're shipping billions overseas for climate aid, which is nonsense, and you're sending billions, if not hundreds of millions, billions in the US case, to Ukraine in a war which doesn't involve us and has no relevance to us whatsoever, that effectively the West has started." And so we're in a period of absolute chaos where they are trying to test us, and they want us to overthrow our own leaders, and they want us to overthrow our own systems of governance, and they want us to fall into absolute chaos. This enables them, of course, to, if we're in such a mess, we're not going to stand up and individually blame people for what they did with COVID and what they did with the vaccines, because it's such chaos. And we have to be very careful not to fall into their trap, because their trap is, we're going to be in such a mess that we'll put our hands up and appeal to a higher power, and they will emerge from the shadows and say, "Oh, we have this United Nations global thing which we can put law and order back in place. We'll help you out." That's what they want. They want to come out of the shadows and say, "We will be your savior," whereas in reality they have been behind the scenes pulling the strings for decades. So they want to make it official. They want to make their control official, and they want us to beg for them to take the reins officially, even though they are responsible for creating all the chaos that we're now seeing. So we have to be very careful with how we navigate our way through this. And my own feeling is that we're better remaining calm, talking like we're doing, and making sure people are on the same page and understanding who the real criminals are. And allowing them, if we don't respond, they can't come in. They have to be invited. And so they're making sufficient waves. They're making waves at the moment to cause us to get angry. And when we get angry, they can then come in with force and use force against us. And so we have to be careful not to do that, because that's not the way to go about these things. But if we remain calm and basically ignore them to the best of our ability, they become like a spoilt child that needs attention. And then everybody looks at them as like they're just like a hyperactive toddler that's had too much sugar. And they eventually they'll have a tantrum and fall asleep on the floor. That's the way I approximately view it.
I think the government is actually banking on global warming, which is why they've cut the pensioners' heating subsidy, because as we know, we've just had one of the hottest summers on record in the UK. My friend in Vancouver said they've equally had the hottest summer on record. At least that's what the TV has been telling them. So no doubt the winter will be, in the mid-20s and they won't need those payments. But I have a slightly different view than Norbs. Not that I disagree with much that he's saying at all. I just perhaps a different view or a different angle, that I actually think they're in chaos. The capital they or them. I believe they need to create chaos and war and what Norbs is talking about. But I think astrologically every empire has been predicted to fail. I think this is what I call the empire of lies. And every metric that I can see is their downfall, and they're panicking. I think they're absolutely terrified. And one of the reasons I also say that is a lot of people talk to me that they're feeling this anxiety or this fear. And, you know, I've suggested to them it's not theirs. What they're picking up on is the quote unquote, or capital them. It's their fear that you know, you've walked into a room and you know someone's had an argument, and you can feel it, right? You know what I'm talking about. I'm sure your listeners do, but you walk in a room, you just know someone's had an argument or is pissed off with you or whatever, right? You just feel it. I believe they are absolutely terrified, and I'm always open to being wrong, but any of the key players, and let's face it, we you know, even the so-called alleged white hats, we don't really know who they are, and I don't want to say one way or the other, but what I do believe is if you're a well-known quote unquote white hat, but aren't, and are playing your cards well, I think it's a time that you'll get found out. I was in America recently for a month, Canada, America, and particularly America, and what you would commonly call the patriots or the rednecks or the right wings, which is really just a white Christian family at the moment, you know, or at least a Christian family who are critical thinkers, but they're named all kinds of things. But the feeling is so strong of we're taking the country back. The word republic is commonly used rather than the corporate United States of America. They seem to understand the fundamental problems and the fundamental history and the fundamental coup that the corporates did. And if one of the key players did turn out to be a wrong 'un, I don't think they're going to get away with it, because the people that I've met seem extremely clued up, and in America, of course, they're very well armed as well, should they need be. No one wants violence. That's why we wrote the Red Pill Revolution. We want a evolution of consciousness and to steer humanity back on course where there's common sense, common law, and common ways and common values, you know, without communism, you know, in there, you know. And I really feel, I know what Norbs is saying, and he's right. We've got to be mindful rather than careful that we're not manipulated and stirred up into a frenzy, and we let the devil in the back door, or whatever analogy is right. But I, like Jamie Ike, I'm so sure we're moving into positive timelines, to use such language, and I'm excited about it, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. And what really resonates with me is that there is this great collective awakening, and that really it's about sovereignty. It's about stepping back into our power, that we are not submissive, we're not passive, we are free, and really invoking that passion within the whole world to step up, not in violence, but to say, you know, no, we're not putting up with this shit anymore. You know, it's about that collective coming together, and not in violence, but actually saying, no, we're not putting up with this anymore. And I think that's really, really powerful as well. And we don't have to do that in a violent way, but sometimes we have to say, back off here. I think this is what's teaching us all, is to step us up back into our power and just say no more, you know. So that's what I'm feeling. What you're both saying there is stepping back in your power.
Yeah, and just sort of stepping in on both the points you made, which I feel are both very, very valid. We are living in a time now where they do seem to actively try and trigger people as much as possible, and to invoke a reaction. And something that I've learned certainly in the past 4 years is observe, don't react is very good. Just step back and observe what is actually happening, question. But what I want to ask you, to you both, is really in all these things that have occurred through vaccines, through and actually where a lot of what's been experienced in the last few years has had the opposite effect and made people question now. That has made even the person that might be the most hard-headed stand back and go, hang on a minute, something really isn't right. And how many of those people have you experienced, even one-to-one or groups that you've been in, within that, are people that wouldn't necessarily be open to a lot of these subjects we've talked about, but they're standing back now and saying, hang on, something is really wrong.
Well, I think that they've reached a point with the vaccines that even people who were pro-vaccine and would have got every vaccine historically, they are now, well, not everybody, but a large number of people are now saying, never again. I'm not letting them jab me with anything. And that could be an older person that never felt the need for a vaccine, but got sucked into it and was damaged, or people in their sort of 50s and 60s who are going to more funerals of friends than they've ever had before. And I've got friends who are, they're going to 2 or 3 funerals in a month, and they're in their 50s, and they know what it is. But again, the behavioral psychologists have played a game here, because they managed to get 2/3 of the population jabbed. And so the majority of people who are going to these funerals are jabbed themselves. And so they know what's causing their friend to die. But they don't want to talk about it because they've had it as well. And they see themselves as a ticking time bomb. I don't necessarily think that's the case in everybody, because it was clear there was massive variations in the batches. But I think what's very interesting is people are realizing it. They're not necessarily very vocal, and you don't see much of them obviously on the media, but the political situation has been very interesting, because they've been very heavy-handed with the politics in the UK, and it's something similar happening in the US, where you had the usual crowd of people who blame the Tories for everything. I mean, you can call them, the socialists, the Labour Party supporters, the lefties, the progressives, whatever you want, whatever name, doesn't matter. But we've all got friends in our Facebook group that blame the Tories for everything. And they wanted the Tories out and Boris get him out and all this sort of stuff. And it was clear to anyone paying attention that the Conservatives were desperate to become unelectable. They wanted to go into that election as absolutely unelectable, to guarantee a massive majority for Starmer, the left-wing side of things, supposedly. But as we know, absolutely without any question, they're both puppets controlled by the same puppet master. And what Starmer has done, especially by doing this sort of cutting the fuel subsidies for the old people, which would be unheard of in previous Labour governments, absolutely unheard of. But by doing that so quickly and so blatantly, I've had conversations online with totally left-leaning anti-Tories, get the Tories out, those sort of people. And they're now beginning to realise, the penny's beginning to drop, that these clowns are controlled by the same people as the other clowns. So that division, which we've had for many years in the UK, is beginning to dissipate, and you're now getting people sitting down, and they're suffering, because if you've been on the left wing and you blamed Boris for mishandling the COVID, once you realize that both parties are controlled by the same criminals above them, you then begin to realize that that's why you misjudged the COVID situation and why you made a mistake and why you accepted the vaccine. So they're going through, a dark night of the soul, those people. But they're also thinking, oh my God, I thought it would get better once we got the Tories out, and it's just getting worse, or it's more of the same. And so those people are suffering a bit at the moment, but at least the smoke is beginning to clear and they are beginning to see the truth, however horrible it may look. We've seen it many years ago. We knew how horrible and corrupt it was, and we knew what the dangers were in terms of the people above genuinely tried to actually want to totally control us and reduce our numbers and enslave us. We knew that. But many people on the left didn't know that, and they're beginning to realize. And the important thing is they're beginning to realize that other people in their friends group who they may have had discussions with over the last few years are actually on their side, because we're all on the side of humanity, and we're beginning to unite and recognize the common enemy, which is the scumbag elite who are trying their best to maintain control. But it's just another part of the awakening. Once you awaken to see that there is just one common enemy, that is an important part of the awakening process, because divide and conquer only works when people accept the division and take sides. And what I see is the divisions are actually dissipating, and that is very important, because that's how we are controlled, by being divided. And I think it's becoming clear that there's less and less division in society and more agreement that the people in charge, regardless of political persuasion, are working for their globalist masters and not for the people. And once that's agreed upon, which I believe it is, that's quite close, as Jeremy said, they lose control at that point. They really do lose control. If they can't keep us divided, they lose control.
Yeah, I want to add to that if I can. Perhaps the most important thing that was happening during COVID was not the marketing of a virus that does not exist, has never existed, and scientifically, actually, no virus has ever been isolated and identified other than in a computer program. And that shocks less and less as well now than it did 4 years, 3 years, 2 years ago. But is what moves they made are what I think the mass awakening is. So they may not agree yet with much of what people like me and Graeme say, and they may be even contentious. But what I think they're quietly seeing is what happened during that historical global attack, meaning worldwide, the same message, the same lies, the same weapons were used against people: repetition, fear, behavioral modification, psychology, and all that sort of thing. And this is what our vlog is about, that I'm going to release publicly. It's normally just for our members on our membership site, but is they try, and this should be the red flag forever moving forward. They tried very effectively to silence and ruin and cancel both your ability to communicate online, but also your ability to earn money. I've been cancelled and had so many times the online financial tools taken away from me to transact with clients around the world, because my business is worldwide and online. But they tried every single tactic, heavy-handed, to stop conversation. Anything that disagreed factually or otherwise, even if we were wrong and even if our information was wrong, it shouldn't be ever stopped, banned, dampened, fact-checked, or anything. You're grown-ups. You're meant to be able to go out there and find out for yourself. And guess what? You've been misled for decades. the misinformation and fact checking is the freaking governments and television, right? But so what I'm saying is, you know, we were told to trust the science, an oxymoron if ever there was one. The very basis of science is don't trust the science, challenge it, right? And if it's robust, it will stand on its own two legs. And if it isn't, we'll chip away at it and come up with something better. That is the basis of science. Number two, you know, the PCR was never a test. Carrie Mullis, very unfortunately died conveniently at the beginning, but it was never a test. Again, a testament to don't trust the science, meant to challenge. Number three, science was put as the new religion, you know, and I am allergic to religion. I know a lot of very good people who have very strong faith and are in religious persuasions, and they're wonderful people doing wonderful things. But religion, man-made religion, I tend not to trust it. So I hope that's clear on how I define that. But they made science the religion, and don't question the religion. It's a mortal sin, and science isn't a religion. And I think what people are starting to see now is that, I mean, Graeme and I know that it's reckoned 95% of all science isn't science. It's scientism, data manipulation with an outcome that suits whoever paid them, right?
Yeah.
There's very little science going on. But even the good science, it's just part of a story. You know, you can't put it to one side and take people's experience or decades or centuries of knowledge that mankind has gained. For example, when you're ill, even if viruses did exist, which they don't, other than Bill Gates viruses, which, how interesting that he named computer infections viruses and not bacteria or germs. He picked that word deliberately so that it was planted into the mind of the world that virus is something pathogenic. You don't even have to say deadly or pathogenic. Everyone assumes a virus is damaging. But let's assume a virus did exist, and let's assume it did make you unwell, which they don't. We were told the only option is to stick a needle in your arm and inject something that you can't be told what is in it. Now, if you look at nature, anything that breaks the skin by design is in nature, plants or animals or insects, is normally, in fact, I can't think of one positive thing that breaks the skin that doesn't harm you or worse. And injections are follow along with nature, whether it be an insect bite or a plant prickling you or whatever, porcupine or whatever. It's all negative when it breaks the skin. So we were told this is the only solution. And because we've been trained by the indoctrination, which is currently still called education, you know, we weren't able to think our way out of it for the greater part. Because if we could, we would look back at the past and go, well, you know what? Fresh air, sunshine, manage the fever, a hot toddy, which is what they used to give you when you had a fever. My mum would give me a little bit of gin as a baby, you know, and you might mock that, but, you know, no one dropped dead from a little bit of gin, not even a little baby. When you were teething, they used to rub a little bit of gin on the baby's gum, for example, you know. But we would go back to old ways and also, you know, common knowledge of what strengthens, nurtures human health, which is nutrition. And the world is overnourished with calories and starved to death in nutrition while poisoning them with chemicals. So every angle you look at this, the COVID era, it was an assault on humanity being human. And I think that's what they're waking up to. Because, you know, to finish my point, even if Norbs and I were wrong, completely wrong, our information wrong, everything was wrong, we should have the right defended to stand up and speak about it. And you should have the right and adult and decency and ability to critically think and consider it and leave it, take it or not, as the case may be. And also, and I'll finish here, we how we were kind of educated or learned to speak to people was not to make categoric statements. We say things like, well, this is interesting, it looks like, and we keep it open. It looks like there aren't any viruses. It looks like we can't find any evidence of virus. Carrie Mullis, when he looked into AIDS and HIV and was only working in the intellectual and academic elite, went, hey guys, where's the paper? Where's the paper on the HIV AIDS virus? Assuming someone would go, this one. And there wasn't one, because there wasn't. And he was shocked. And he's a Nobel Prize winner. Shocked to find there wasn't. The whole academia has worked on assumptions and boys' club. And I think, I may not have done it as eloquently as I wanted to today, but I think that is what's happening to the world population. Call them patriots, call them whatever. They're starting to realize that you can't trust the governments. You can't trust the television. You certainly can't trust the media. And that is the greatest, I think the single greatest thing I've ever seen, certainly that's come out of COVID, right? It is this ability for people to once again start thinking and not trusting anyone who hasn't earned their trust.
And I think that you both spoke so passionately, and I think anybody that's listening, I resonated with it. And it was one of the reasons me and Chris started our platform, is because we were so sick and tired of being shut down. And it's really, we live in a mad world, because every system is designed to be upside down. And for people like us that see things as they are, we do live in a very, very bad world. And people must understand, that you must be arrogant to think that we're never going to agree with everything. Everything we're expressing is just our opinions, but we should be given the right to express our opinions, wherever that's wrong or right, and create a platform where we should be able to speak with one another and question things. We are inquisitive beings. We're here. We should question things, tear them apart, do our research. And I've been saying this for years, don't just believe even what we are saying. Go out there, do your research, question things. But a lot of people don't. They're just blatantly, I guess it's one of the greatest sort of tricks is to play on humanity's ignorance. People, when you go shopping, I say to people, read what you're buying, look at what's putting in your food. And it's just so easy for people just to pick things up, put them in the basket. And I try to say to people, question what you're eating, read the labels. But so, you both talked very, very much about, COVID and the vaccine and all that. So moving towards sort of the future, the systems breaking down, are you both saying that, us as humanity, we're going to move towards more the natural way of living? We talk about common law, but more about the health and well-being side. Is that something that you both feel we should be working towards, inspiring and empowering people to go back to the land, going back into natural eating, not eating and buying all this rubbish that is out there? So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, that's it. I'll just take this first, because I want to make sure we cover something before we go into detail, because there is a growing distrust of the regulatory authorities, let's call it. And so, whereas people used to go, if it's available in the supermarket, you assume it's safe to eat, and you don't assume that it's going to actually cause you any harm. But there's a growing awareness that there is a lot of crap put in commercial feed, as we call it, which is almost to feed the cattle. And there's a growing awareness that, some medical procedures or some medical interventions or some pharmaceuticals are not necessarily the best course of action. And people who have lost trust or recognize that they've been lied to, recognize that they've been damaged by the system are beginning to switch off the mainstream TV. Well, not beginning, they're doing it in droves now. And you've got the growth of the alternative media. And yeah, you only have to look at someone like Joe Rogan, hugely popular, big, most valuable podcast platform in the world. And there's a whole load of other people gathered around him, not necessarily directly connected to him, but I notice with, let's call them normie friends, that over the last year or two, they post more Joe Rogan type comments. They'll post Brett Weinstein. They'll post all these people who are now criticizing the establishment, calling out the damages that have been done. And so, again, this is a word of caution to people. Someone like, what's he called? Russell Brand. Got people, quoting him. And he's out with somewhat of an anti-establishment.
You mean the born-again Christian?
Yeah. And so we need to be very careful, because remember, the people in charge, the people who are pulling the strings ultimately, who are trying to pull the wool over our eyes and trying desperately to protect their own power and control, they've been at this for a long time, and they're actually very good at what they do. And they're very well resourced, and they're able to pay people to run simulations of every possible outcome. And so they will have known that we were going to lose trust in the mainstream media. They will have known that we were going to lose trust in mainstream commentators and in regulatory institutions. And so it would be remarkable indeed if they didn't have that base covered already. And so there are a large number of influencers, commentators on alternative media who are undoubtedly, categorically controlled by the forces of evil. Let's call it that. The same controllers. And we have to be very careful. Although they now, like Joe Rogan now is, questioning the vaccines and arguing about what should be done about it. But he recommended the thing in the first place. He frightened his audience talking about the existence of a disease. He then talked about how we should all get the vaccine. He then shifted slightly to saying he didn't do that, but he used ivermectin and all this thing. That's another rabbit hole. You've got Brett Weinstein, another one. He's Mr. Intellectual Academia. I'm so clever, you just have to adore me because I'm so incredibly intellectual and clever. He fell for the whole thing, hook, line, and sinker from the very beginning, or at least he pretended to, wearing a mask on his podcast. He was a laughable, pathetic picture of a human being. Absolutely woeful. So he's either filling a role, acting a role, or genuinely retarded. And I don't know which it is, and I don't know which is worse. But for me, that's 100% discard. I mean, he's either an actor, so he's lying to you, or he is a retard trying to pretend to be an academic. He's the slowest academic I've ever met in my life. I mean, he has to be just dim or corrupt and trying to mislead you.
I'm picking up you don't like him.
No, I mean, it's just, I don't know how people put up with him. It's horrendous. Russell Brand. Then there's that idiot Nurse John, or whatever the hell he's called. John Campbell. Doctor, because he's done a doctorate in nursing. I mean, please. I mean, the best highlighter pen in the Western world. Yes, I can highlight government reports, government statistics, and comments from Pfizer. Well done, John. John recommended every vaccine, every booster, everything under the sun, every mask, every double up mask, goggles, the works. He denied the obvious. He covered up. He's obviously a paid shill. No one gets that many views by being so shit on YouTube. You're not allowed to have that many subscribers unless you're part of the system. So sorry, John, you might be a lovely guy, but you're a stinking sellout. Scum. Right? And he's talking about possible nanomaterials in the vaccine jabs. Now, we wrote a fucking detox protocol in July of 2021 highlighting the risk of nanomaterials in the jabs. That's 3 years ago. We wrote the fucking detox protocol to get the shit out. He, in this last week, has only now started talking about that. And people are trusting him because he seems to be talking, he seems to be speaking out against the bad people. He is part of them, and he has been from the beginning. Or at the very least, he's taking their money to lie to you. So he's either the same as Weinstein. He's either a fundamental crook or an absolute idiot. Either way, disregard him. And there's a whole network of these people. And there's another whole network of people. There's another whole group of people who are not connected, who are like ourselves here. We got banned from platforms for speaking the truth when it needed to be said and when it could have made a difference, and when it did make a difference to some people. And we were banned, we were shadow banned, we didn't get any promotion, our ability to earn a living, as Jeremy said, we were removed from payment processors. We were just restricted from any reach anywhere. Elon Musk is another example. People hold him out as a savior. Again, not at all. He is in league with the rest of them. It's a false image of he is pushing for free speech. No, he still has hundreds of thousands of individual commentators and researchers who were right in the beginning. They're still banned on his platform. But he is now heavily promoting all these controlled opposition voices to give the illusion that this is the new group of people these are the cool guys to follow. If you've seen through the mainstream media lies, these are the new cool kids on the block. But the cool kids on the block all lied to you in the beginning. They all misled you, whether deliberately through corruption or through incompetence. And none of them should be trusted. And we must be very, very careful not to get sucked into that. The real people are like ourselves here, who are hard to find. Anyone who's promoted on a platform is not to be trusted. It's relatively straightforward, really. But are things going to go back to being more natural, Jeremy?
No, listen. Vote Graeme Norbury for president, right? Of the New World Order. Yeah, and cynics could go, well, why should we trust you? Actually, my mentors were the opposite. My two mentors were, don't trust me. And that's what I want anybody ever listening to me and Nord. Don't trust us. Do listen, do question, do think, and be open and willing to being wrong or change your mind. That's how we've got where we are.
And look at the track record. Go back and look at our track record and any other commentator who is currently being promoted as an alternative mainstream trusted voice. Look at their track record, and I guarantee they were lying to you in 2020 and 2021. I guarantee it.
It's true, and our voice is now being heard. I'm getting on some very large podcasts, and I think the next year or two is going to be very, very, very interesting. But I think I would want to rephrase your question. I don't like the word natural, particularly because it's been hijacked and abused, and a lot of people that are, shall we say, practicing natural medicine are really just practicing philosophically, allopathically, but naturally, and so that's why I sort of shy away from that word. They may have good intentions. I'm not saying they're nefarious necessarily, but I prefer to put the word true in front of everything. So I think I'm 55 years old and pretty damn experienced with human beings. having helped so many of them as a natural doctor. There you go, I'm using the word natural, but a true doctor is what I actually consider myself to be. And doctor originally means teacher. So that's all I really am, a true teacher. But, you know, from studying and living in 6 countries, I can tell you that the one thing, and there may be more, but the one thing every color, race, creed agrees on is they hate liars. When they found out that they've been lied to, it's a universal reaction of anger, horror, and it's very difficult to ever trust that human being again once you've learned they've been deliberately lied to. And so what I believe people want is truth. I think there's a resonance, there's a harmony to truth. So what we want is true farmers, you know, not those that have to spray their crops to make a living. And I say that because when I was in New Zealand, I had a kiwi farmer, kiwi fruit. Not he would happen to be a Kiwi as well, being a New Zealander, but a kiwi fruit farmer. This is just an example, right? He came to me, he wasn't very well, not surprisingly. And, you know, when I asked him, you know, what he does, and he got onto telling me what he sprays the land, and he dropped his head down in sort of, guilt. There's no other way. You know, he knew it was wrong, and he had to drive a hermetically sealed, meaning no air. I'm sure your listeners know what it means, but no air can get in or out of the tractor, and still he wears an oxygen mask just in case, because he would spray the kiwi fruit trees with a pesticide that contains cyanide, and it killed everything that was around it, birds, everything, you know, just everything died. And if it breached the tractor, and he would die also. And I looked at him in disbelief, and I said, well, why on earth would you do such a thing? And he said, well, if I don't, we get about a 50% yield on average from the buds. I think it's buds that they grow the kiwi, they call it the kiwi fruit, then blooms from. He said, if we spray it, we get nearly 100%. And to my mind, the only way that would be the case is because the tree recognizes it's poisoned, and it uses the additional fruit to dump the poison in, because that's how it works in the body. That's all that tumors and cysts are. It's just the body can't get rid of poisons. This is very simplistic, but it's basically right. It can't get rid of it, so it starts creating, you know, cysts and nodules and tumors and God knows what else to dump it in until such time. But that's the only way he could make a profit. And so when I say true farmers, you know, a true nurturers of the land and integration of the animals that we've seen very clearly, animals have turned desert back to arable land when you manage them properly. I think we want true doctors. I think everybody knows politicians are. My mother always used to say, and she passed last year, amplified and sped up her demise because she was jabbed. She ended up with a massive stroke and died. But she always used to say to me, how do you know when a politician's lying? Their mouth moves. And I think most people, left, right, middle, or whatever, have a deep distrust. So we want truth. We don't need frickin' politicians, and we certainly don't really need scientists. We need engineers, we need builders, we need mechanics, we need farmers, we need community. And so I think what people crave, and I also think we're seeing this as our popularity is improving quite quickly now, is people want authentic. You know, there's so much content production out there that it's a little bit intimidating, but a lot of it is so fake and repetitive, and now it's moving into AI, which doesn't worry me at all, because AI will end up consuming itself, I think. But people crave authentic, and I think that's why they love Norbs and I. You know, I think if anything, Norbs and I are not dogmatic. We are very good analysts. We're a very good team together with our individual skill sets, and we're able to look at stuff because our nads are pumped by what's true and right. And usually what's true and right is good. And from my travels, you know, I've seen that people are basically good. We know how to make them bad. You break up the family, particularly remove the father and create single parent families. You throw poverty or lack of money into the mix and condensed living, and you've got crime and drugs and gangs and a whole lot of mess very, very quickly. But when people are left alone, that's what they want. They just want to be left alone, earn enough. Most people aren't greedy. They just want a house, a home, a life, make love, eat food, socialize, go on holiday, and they'll be happy. And I think that's where the elite fucked up. You know, if they'd have just kept the enormous wealth that they've had and power and influence and privilege and left pretty much everyone alone, they probably never would have been sussed out in the first place. But there's something parasitical and psychopathic, maybe not even human, we'll find out, but certainly psychopathic and parasitical about them, that there's never satisfied with what they've got. And that, again, I think is what people are waking up to. So I'm very excited about moving forward and all the brilliance and beauty and community and humanity that's, I think, waiting to burst back on the scene. And I know I've overextended myself. I want to say one more thing. When I was about 20 and I lived in this small apartment building, there was a couple on the ground floor, pensioners, and a lovely couple, Jean and Rodney. And I used to go and have gin and tonics with them every evening and listen to their stories. It was a lovely relationship I had with them. And I remember Jean saying to me one day, what we need is a good war. Another world war. I said, what on earth are you talking about? And of course, she explained herself, but I get it. And I think you guys will get it. I'm sure your audience get it. She said, when we were at war and she lived through World War II, everybody helped each other. She said the community really came together. So what she didn't want another world war, she wanted the community back. And I think people are good. And I think when humanity gets back on track and so-called leaders are benevolent and actually have earned the right to have power to be more benevolent and help people and nations, I think we're going to have like a great time doing great things.
You really, really, really exciting times. It's a great time to be alive, you know, bring it on. But I just want to rear the conversation a little bit further on. Something that you see a lot of, and you talked about, there's a lot of rubbish out there, not many people that work authentically, not coming from a judgment perspective. And this can be incredibly confusing to a lot of people. They don't know what to believe. Do they believe this? You know, you hear one nutritionist, dietitian, naturopath saying one thing, and then another one saying another thing. That could be incredibly confusing. And one of them is, what is your thoughts on cholesterols? Because that's a big thing. That really is the fear that doctors talk about cholesterols. What is the myth? What's the fear on it? Jeremy, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm going to let what I call Professor Norbs, he's not a professor, but I'm going to let Norbs tackle it. But and it is a plug, but me and Norbs teach this to, well over 1,000 people now at our membership site at jeremyayres.com, or Naturally Better For You, spelled any way you want. Come in and try it out for 30 or 90 days, because we do these fantastic vlogs. You've seen them. They are fantastic, where we're walking Lake District and we do Q&As, and we've got a fantastic protocol that destroys all the myths and is helping people literally all over the world recover their health. And cholesterol, what a scam that one was, Norbs.
Right. Okay. This is very, very, very straightforward. We never used to talk about cholesterol at all. 50 years ago, not even 40 years ago, if you went to the doctor, they didn't measure it, they didn't discuss it, it wasn't even mentioned. And then, purely by chance, somebody in a laboratory somewhere discovered that they had a drug, or a chemical, let's call it that, a chemical, which if they gave you the chemical in the form of a pill, it lowered your cholesterol. And they could measure something in your blood. They could give you this tablet, and what they measured went down. And then they went, oh, that's quite an effective chemical, isn't it? And then they went, now, if we could persuade people that their cholesterol needed to be measured, and if we could persuade them that it needed to be lower than whatever the measurement was, we could give them this drug, then we could test it again, and they would see that their cholesterol had gone down. And they'd be very happy with us, and they'd feel better, and we'd be successful. And they'd have to stay on this drug to keep the cholesterol at the right level. They'd have to stay on the drug forever. And so we'd make a shitload of money. Now, how do we get people to be afraid of cholesterol? And so they dug into the fake lipid hypothesis, or the erroneously wrong lipid hypothesis, which is, saturated fat causes heart disease. And they found that people who had heart disease or diseases of the circulatory system had cholesterol in their arteries. A bit like firemen turn up at house fires. No one blames the fireman for starting the fire, but cholesterol is a similar type of thing. It's there. It reacts to influence. One of its many functions is it reacts to inflammatory conditions in the body, and so you tend to get it when there's inflammation, and it turns up, but it's not the cause of it. Like the fireman's not the cause of the house fire. So they began this publicity stunt 40 years ago, and it's no more than that. They just said, look, cholesterol's bad for you. Here's why. It causes heart attacks because we find it in all the heart. Here we go. Cholesterol's awful, awful, awful. Come and get it measured. Your doctor will measure it. They'll give you these pills. They'll lower it. You'll be great. That's what they did. And then, not content with that, over the last 30, 40 years, the level that they consider to be too high has been lowered. And they keep lowering it. So the level that they say is too high for cholesterol today is way lower than it was 20 years ago. And what you can say is, are we healthier as a result of having taken statins? No, we're not. We have a similar number, if not a larger number, of heart attacks and coronary incidents. And this is before the damage from the COVID jabs. You could take data up to 2020. We have a similar, if not higher, number of cardiac events. And we have a vastly higher number of people who go on to develop neurological disabilities.
Dementia,
because the brain,
Parkinson's.
yeah, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stuff like that, diabetes, kidney problems. Your brain is made of cholesterol. Your body functions on cholesterol. There's no such thing as good nor bad cholesterol. Cholesterol is used to transport things around the body. It gets better when it's exposed to sunlight, especially ultraviolet sunlight. It turns into vitamin D. So what do we have at the moment? We have a crisis in the UK. People have low vitamin D levels. If you're taking statins, you're lowering your cholesterol. If you lower your cholesterol, you're lowering your body's ability to make vitamin D. The whole thing is nonsense. And so what I say to people about cholesterol is, if they had found a substance 40 years ago that raised cholesterol in the body, they would be testing for cholesterol, and they'd be telling you that it was too low, and they'd be telling you to take the drugs to raise it. It's nonsense. Ignore it. It is of no value to you whatsoever to know your levels, or to worry about them, or to even think about them. Your body controls your cholesterol levels. It produces the right amount for the conditions that your body is experiencing at the time.
I would go further than nonsense. It's criminal.
It's absolutely criminal.
It's absolutely criminal. Ansel Keys, who was paid to do the lipid hypothesis, is a perfect example of what we mentioned earlier, that there's no science or nearly no science going on. He cherry-picked data to form a correlation between saturated fat, cholesterol, and heart disease, that if all the data was in, there was no pattern, no nothing. And that was the lipid hypothesis. And medicine took it, and as Graeme rightfully said, they took it so that they could then create a test that created a drug, which is one of the best-selling drugs in history. Statins is absolutely one of the worst drugs people have ever taken, because prior to it, we just didn't have the neurological decline, but when we ate lots of animal fats, it just didn't happen. So I think it's absolutely criminal. I think Ansel Keys is responsible for millions and millions and millions of deaths and suffering and horrific ends of life. And interestingly, after discovering or publishing the lipid hypothesis, of which to this day there's no evidence that saturated fat causes heart disease or cholesterol, no evidence at all, actually. But after he published it, he then went to the Mediterranean and pretty much ate a carnivore diet and lived to over 100, certainly late into his 90s. But, the facts are, every cell in your body has cholesterol. Your brain is made of cholesterol. Your sex hormones begin the biochemical process to make sex hormones starts with cholesterol. Now let's think about that one. What might happen if you lower saturated animal fats and cholesterol in human beings? It would mean their sex hormones are reduced and confused, and we would probably get very confused people. Some of them might start to think they were a girl when they were a boy, and vice versa. And who would benefit there? But cholesterol, the body makes 75-80% of the cholesterol. Eating cholesterol is going to have very little effect on raising your cholesterol. And it was never the cholesterol anyway that was causing the plaques. It was, at the moment, most good thinking, critical thinking, scientific people would place their money on the oxalates found in plants. Oxalates will be as well known as gluten in 5 years. Oxalates are microscopic shards of glass, like particles found in particularly green leaf plants. And we're pushing a plant-based diet now by the World Health Organization. And the seed oils. Seed oils is got to be the biggest coup they've ever managed. The animals won't eat seed oils, marketed as vegetable oils. The seed oils were only ever used for oiling machines, lighting lamps, and making soap. And then when petroleum came in and they couldn't sell it as soap or those things anymore, they brought the chemists in and turned it into Crisco, which looks like lard. And they managed to convince the American market and then the world that eating basically oil that was for machinery and lamps was a healthy fat. And animal fats, which we've lived off for thousands of years, were bad for you. I mean, these people are many things, but stupid they ain't, right? They've literally got us eating industrial oils as healthy, right? So, when you start to, again, it's like the virus I said, even if a virus existed, made you sick, the solution isn't it's a whole plethora of other things. The reason heart disease is around is more to do with what I've just discussed and a few other things, including the etheric level. The heart is the organ of love. Poets have known it for centuries. The Chinese have known it. And the heart is fed by joy through the blood. And that's why the Chinese have concentrated on the more etheric side of things. And anybody that's had heart problems that I've consulted with usually had affairs of the heart that had been damaged, literal affairs or broken hearts or grief or something like that, or great trauma of the heart. And so, there's a whole to pin it on cholesterol. I mean, they're just so brilliant. To pin it on cholesterol is so stupid that it's I just got to take my hat off to them that they managed to do it.
And I have to say, it's a tremendous business plan, because it's a loss leader. Well, it's not even a loss leader. I mean, you know the concept of a loss leader. You sell something at a loss in order to generate future business.
Yeah.
With cholesterol, they sell the drug at full price, and it creates so many knock-on health issues down the line that you end up being on pills for diabetes, you end up being on pills for acid reflux, you end up being on pills for neurological conditions. It's an unbelievably profitable business. But it's
more
it's
can I just
diabolical.
it's more nefarious than that.
Yeah, it's diabolical.
In my view, sorry to interrupt, but the more nefarious element is throughout history, the elders carried the knowledge and wisdom of what is and what should be, and so if you wanted to 2-3 generations corrupt that and put us on a path that wasn't common sense and wasn't common ways and wasn't common knowledge, you'd want to knock the elders out.
Yeah, I wonder how many
Latins have done.
I wonder how many young kids today do not have. I wonder how many people today do not have a memory of having received wise words from their grandfather or grandmother. We all do. But I bet you there's a lot of people who, by the time they were able to communicate with their grandparents, that their grandparents were too far gone with Alzheimer's due to the statins. So we've deprived an entire generation and more of youth from accessing the wisdom of their grandparents. And that's criminal.
Something I just wanted to ask there, it was brought up a little bit, is I wanted to ask you also about the low testosterone that a lot of people have been experiencing as well. And also through, these things we've talked about, even people putting information out there as being on platforms as part of the system. I like to try and, where I can, to look at things and say, right, what's this teaching me? Do you think it's actually showing us that we need to take more responsibility ourselves for what we feel is right for our bodies, what we know to be right as well,
Right.
And not just following?
Well, there's a general. I mean, it's an excellent question, and we've kind of already, put elements of the solution in front of you. But first of all, we have our conference that we recently had, because our brand is Naturally Better, was back to a naturally better future. So we were playing off the Back to the Future, and the truth is, we have to go back and revisit and relook at the old ways and use technology and modern knowledge to enhance it, not ruin it. And if you go and look at what your ancestors were doing 2-3 generations ago, I doubt they would have had any issues eating grains, and I doubt they would have had limp penises in the morning and low testosterone. And when you come to that point now, there's a plethora of reasons there's low testosterone. Number one, as I just mentioned, you cannot make the sex hormones unless you're eating lots of cholesterol and saturated fat. That is the starting ingredient for the biochemical process to get there. Number two, of course, the nations of around the world have been flooded with plastics and soy-based products full of estrogen or chemicals mimicking estrogen. So let's keep it simple. There's been an influx of hormonal disruptors with a lack of the ingredient saturated fat and cholesterol to make the sex hormones in the first instance. And then third, and there's much more than this, but these are the big ones. Thirdly, natural light, which is Norbs's, expertise area, having studied Jack Kruse. Natural light triggers the glands and all the elements involved when to release certain things and how much. Artificial light interrupts that, and you get spurts and stops and starts. So the whole thing, like, the only way I can describe it is if I came into your house or room at night and started to flick a light on and off, probably within a minute, you'd be like, bitch, stop that. Right? It'd be that. And like, I'm serious, stop that. And if I did it for 2 minutes, you probably would hit me or slap me or do something, right? But that's from a glandular point of view and timing of when things are meant to be released and how much. Most people under 30 or 40 almost never see outdoors now. They're gaming or computer work or content production or what. So all they're getting is artificial light signals. You haven't got a chance.
And the other thing you've missed out, which I think should make it into the top reasons why sex hormones are in a mess for men and women, is these raw materials that come from the saturated fats in the first place. Before they get made into sex hormones, there's a kind of junction in the in the hormonal pathway, and if you're stressed and your body needs to produce cortisol, the body prioritizes cortisol production. So it takes the root hormone, which is pregnenolone, and it uses it to make as much cortisol as it needs. And if you're constantly stressed, bear in mind, we're supposed to be stressed briefly and infrequently. We're running away from an animal, we're chasing something, we're doing something stressful in the moment. We're not supposed to be chronically stressed. And so if we're chronically stressed, we use cortisol like it's going out of fashion. So when the body comes to rebuild its cortisol levels, it uses up all the raw material supply to make cortisol, and there's none or very little left over to go on to produce the sex hormones. So overall stress and bodily inflammation is another area that you absolutely have to target. And much of that stress comes from artificial light and non-native EMFs and lack of sunshine.
You find as well, just to interject there, and I don't know what your thoughts was this with females, that so many women struggle getting pregnant or have fertility problems. Is this also, we've talked about, testosterone with men, but what about with women? Have you find there been a correlation with a lot of women as well?
Well, I've just, finished, and it's been published, the documentary by Jamie Icke called Infertile. It's a huge problem. Women, again, the teenage girls have been very much targeted to think fat is a demon. To consume fat is going to make them put on weight, or now they think it's cruel and evil because to kill animals that we've done respectfully and spiritually for centuries is now somehow wrong. And so they've been pushed towards plant-based and soy and obviously lots of sugar and carbohydrates and what have you. But in the case histories that I take, and most of our membership, although it's changing, is 90%. We always will be 90% women. They tend to reach out and ask for help before men, right? Men need to be usually really shit scared that they're dying or in pain before they're asked for help, or their women drag them, mums, sisters, or wives, or whatever. They go, no, you're going to see Jeremy, right? But what's extremely common is because they're so undernourished and their fats are wrong when they go through puberty, let alone iodine, which is essential. They're all iodine deficient and usually toxic with the other halides, chlorine, fluoride, bromine, that sort of thing. So when they go through puberty, they tend to have very painful, heavy periods. There'll be people listening now go, oh my God, that's me or my daughter. And so the painful periods are because of what I just said. And so the body with women, men tend to get nosebleeds when they're super toxic, but the women uses the period to get rid of toxic blood. That's why it's so painful. Other things as well, and heavy, right? And so they reach for the painkillers, which makes them even more toxic. But more usually, they go down to their general poisoner, GP, and he'll put them on the pill. All right, and so they are immediately altered, where the progesterone, which is known as the happy hormone, starts to drop and the estrogen comes up. Now, when that happens, you get these very moody young girls, which most young girls are very moody, very aggressive, and very changeable, and they think
but Jeremy, their period pain goes away, so it works.
Yes, their period pain. Most women don't realize that because they do have a bleed in most of these contraceptives, that it's not a real period, because the way the contraceptives work is it stops the egg bursting from the fallopian tube, and that's where it can get into circulation and you can get pregnant. That bursting forms this little scar tissue called the corpus luteum, I think it is. But that scar tissue, whatever the name, is what triggers progesterone production. And progesterone is the happy hormone. When women are pregnant, when they're healthy, which is not usual, why they used to say you're glowing, and people just knew they were pregnant. They're glowing, their hair gets thicker. There's still women out there that love being pregnant because they've never felt so good, because they have high progesterone. It's the happy hormone. Okay. But that is not what you see in young girls and women worldwide. You see moody, aggressive, angry, horrid, changeable women, and they know it. And because the media has cultivated that into trying to make women men and men women, in the sense that every action hero, every detective is a woman. The women are the ones beating up the guys in the movies, and the men are all pussies. And, they've cultivated that to make it look like that's what I'm just a modern, powerful. They're not. I consult with them. They're miserable.
You see a lot of women. You see a lot of women in we work with a lot of, like you said, majority of our clients are females. Yeah. It seems that I'm not saying to all women, have become very masculine, and have become over masculine in some ways. And I mean, Chris talked about it the other day.
Well, absolutely, because there is huge, deliberate hormonal manipulation going on with knowledge and intent, and their bodies. If they don't know what I'm teaching you, and most don't, all they know is what they feel. So they're angry, which is a more male quality, right? And so they become more masculine. The culture and social media is trying to drive women to become men and men to become women, as to the very extreme. But when you treat people ancestrally, i.e., we start introducing their natural diet, we start bringing fats and cholesterol back in, we get them outside and blah, 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 people become more masculine as men, and the women become more feminine. That's not a negative thing. That is the design.
It's also true that women on the pill, their ability to smell pheromones is severely limited, if not eliminated completely. And women are supposed to be able to smell the suitability of a mate, of a male, as to whether it's going to be whether he's going to be compatible with her. And so what happens is women end up with a man, they're on the pill, and then they decide they're going to settle down and get married or whatever they're going to do, and they want to have kids. So they come off the pill and the pheromones aren't there. That match isn't there. And so they find that they don't actually like this guy, and for some reason they can't get pregnant. It's because the body's natural ability of putting two people together using biological resonances in the form of smell and touch and sound have been impeded by the chemical within the contraceptive pills.
Yeah.
And so, we're messing with things at all sorts of different levels, and that creates situations where you've got breakups, problems, potentially violence in the home, all sorts of stuff going on because you got with the wrong person, because you were what's it called, sort of handicapping your own innate abilities to choose an appropriate mate. And you could also say that men don't want aggressive, angry, masculine-looking women. So yeah, that's population control right there.
Yeah, it's generations of manipulation that have got us here. If you look up Pottinger's cats, and when they changed the diet and environment, how quickly the third generation was unrecognizable to the great grandparents. It's generations of manipulation. But when they come off the pill, and it's not just the pill, it's injections, and the worst one of the implants, like Marina is catastrophic frequently to women's health. But anyway, when they come off, they think, oh, I'll just better get pregnant. And that's usually not the case. It's a lot of work to get that back functioning, sometimes a couple of years. I have a joke that I've got lots of women pregnant, and I tell it in public. Unfortunately, people laugh and understand what I'm talking about, and then their husbands pay me. But it's a year is quite usual. But if you don't start putting everything right, that you haven't got a chance of getting the hormonal balance and signaling right again. And guess what? They turn into much more feminine, loving, maternal women as nature intended. And all those women I've helped become happier, not pissed off that they're more womanly, shall we say. They become much happier in their skin. So it's huge. And if you think about it in the scale of things, it's just another one of the mass weapons of depopulation. Make them infertile.
But there is a glimmer of hope there. I understand that there is a little bit of a trend amongst younger women that they've realised that becoming sort of slightly hairy, overweight cat ladies working in cubicles 50 hours a week
outrageous.
Is not really the pathway to sort of serenity and happiness. And so the idea of the trad wife is becoming a bit of a trend. And, being a traditional feminine figure, the caring, nurturing figure, is becoming something that some of the younger women are beginning to aspire towards, because they've seen just how unhappy the older generations of women have become following feminist ideals for the last 40 years.
Yeah, absolutely. What you both shared there, I suppose, brings us sort of full circle in what can occur then is, particularly Graeme, what you mentioned, is relationships then splitting, and then even families breaking apart. And then we come back to what the point you brought back at the beginning, that same scenario playing out. But yeah, as we sort of draw to the end of this podcast here, I feel I could talk to you both for another 2 hours easily. Because I have to say, when we start this podcast, and it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you both, because you're both so passionate, and you can just tell by the way you're talking that, it's heart-centered and it matters. And I find yeah, absolutely. And going back to Graeme's point earlier, is I find the people that are hardest to find online, that's where the great information is, because they've still not learned this lesson that if you ban something, it makes it more interesting to most of us. We want to find out what it's all about. We're immediately more drawn to it. If as soon as we put up this last interview here and it got taken off, everybody wanted to see it even more. So what is this information straight away? But it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you both. Thanks for giving your time. It's much appreciated. But just before we finish up, is there anything, if you want to share, if those listening want to get in touch,
Yes.
Listening to you both, that they feel, these are people that could really help us at the moment, that could possibly give us some information that could help us in our lives?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my main day job is one-to-one consultations via Zoom. My clientele all over the world, and if you feel you want specific help, you can contact me at jeremyayres.com and or naturallybetterforyou.com, spelled any way you want, naturallybetterforyou.com. We also Norbs and I have set up, along with John Gusty, a membership site that we've been doing for 2 years now, where I've written what I call the protocol, which is all my knowledge of 30 years condensed into a protocol that is helping literally hundreds and hundreds. Well, we've had well over 1,000 members come on it, and most of them have all had fantastic results. Some of them have been complex cases and they've had to work with me one-to-one. But in that, Norbs and I have produced over 60 30-minute vlogs where we walk in the Lake District and we talk about what we've talked here, but in a humorous and the same way we always do, humorous, poignant, ranty, and people love it. We also have Q&As, live Q&As every 2 weeks. So if you can't afford to have one-to-ones with me, that's where you can come on, become a member. It's only $18. What's that? 13 quid a month. It's nothing, right? And if you can't afford that, write to us and we'll give you a better deal. But we have a forum on Discord, which is a gaming platform. But it's a very, very good forum platform where all the members are talking to each other from all over the world. There's even virtual coffee lounges where they go in and talk and speak with each other. It's just, the community is just amazing. And I was worried when I started the membership that we were just going to unleash a whole load of mental patients, because I know what helping one-to-one is. You release a lot of trauma and a lot of private stuff's going to come up, but it's been, with a few exceptions, amazing, and real human relationships have been made, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. So if you want to know more, if you like what you've heard and you want to learn much more, come and join at jeremyayres.com or naturallybetterforyou.com, again spelled anyway. And if you're really clever and you want to screw us, watch everything in 30 days and then ask for your money back and then leave with a middle finger to got you guys. But most people have stayed long beyond their need because they just love the material we keep putting out.
Yeah, fantastic. And I will we'll post all the links wherever you're listening or watching here for everything that Jeremy shared there. Guys, it's been an absolute pleasure, and let's not leave it 12 months here next time. Let's do one soon. I feel there's a lot more we could get into for sure. That hour and 30 minutes has just absolutely flown by, but such fantastic information, and really I've learned a lot by listening today as well. So thank you so much. And thanks to everybody that's been listening. Please continue to support this podcast. It's much appreciated. Until our next episode, we're going to say goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. See you.